for us, chronologically, something's shifted one year. I can't remember exactly when it was, but we were invited to bring our hives to Merced, and we met Chuck Sowers and started meeting and learning from a whole gang of Oregon, Idaho, Montana, Arkansas, and Nebraska beekeepers at a cafe next to the Turlock Travel Lodge. We discovered a whole kooky collection of the sort of smart, battle-scarred, kind, cool-headed, helpful people that we found out the sort of esprit de corps of beekeepers at that point. And we met and made friends with Jordan Dimmick out at Nampa, on the other side of the state, who is one of the best beekeepers in the country, hands down. We made connections that make it so even now, 20 years later, we have people to call, commiserate, pull each other out of the metaphone in the middle of the night, help us when we're down.
From the Oregon State University Extension Service, this is PolliNation, a podcast that tells the stories of researchers, land managers, and people like you who are making bold strides to improve the health of pollinators. I'm your host, Dr. Adoni Melathopoulos, Associate Professor of Pollinator Health in the Department of Horticulture. Well, Harry, we got a great show this week in the commercial beekeeper segment. Tell us who we're going to be hearing from.
I'm very excited to introduce Karen Finley of Queen Bee Honey from Alpine, Oregon. Karen and Tad have run a very successful pollination business, a honey business out of Alpine for a few decades, and do an excellent job in pollination and working among Oregon beekeepers.
I was really astounded with the interview.
Oh, me too.
It has this kind of arc, where Karen started from. We really hear the beginnings of her beekeeping operation. It gives me echoes of, when we had some of the other episodes where we've just talked about like what it takes to sort of like build a business from the ground up, but also just the reflections on moving forward of taking a beekeeping operation and thinking about the transition to retirement, what it's like, what are some of the challenges in this, wonderful Willamette Valley in terms of keeping bees.
Likewise, and working among her local beekeepers surrounding and the surrounding farms and farming operations, very impressive.
Yeah, real respect for all the people working in this business.
Yes, we're all working hard and trying to make a living at the same time.
Well, without further ado, let's head over to Alpine, Oregon. Let's talk with Karen.
Today we have the great pleasure of talking with Karen Finley of Queen Bee Honey Company, Alpine, Oregon. Thought it would be good right before the big rush down to California to just touch bases. How you doing, Karen?
I'm doing well. We've just had 10 days of pretty great weather. We've had a good opportunity to get through the bees and grade them and know what we've got headed down to California. And guys are down at the shop today getting truck stuff together. So we're going to head out next week.
Great. You have good weather coming for that, it looks like.
Yeah, we are.
So here you are with semi-loads of bees ready to go to California. Just, we've known each other for 30 years, but I really didn't have a good sense of how you all get started in this business. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got started in beekeeping?
Let's see. Well, in my teens, I wanted to be a politician in the state legislature to protect the Rocky Mountain West from developers. In my 20s, I wanted to be a ranger with the National Park Service and have a livelihood of living outside and studying birds and prairie grasslands and protecting natural areas. And in my 30s, I figured out farming was the most meaningful of all pursuits. So all of that converged in a sort of natural and organic way to beekeeping. I started out with catching a few swarms when I was in graduate school with my office mate, Don Wolf. And I didn't know how to take care of them. And I began working for another beekeeper as a volunteer for a few days to learn what I was doing, and ended up continuing to work with him as a side job. Kenny was a meticulous and organized, talented and patient teacher. And I loved working on bees and coming to know the people and places of the county that I learned about, the cycle of changing tasks and taking care of these tiny livestock. Kenny encouraged me to get some of my own bees and allowed me to extract in his shop. And pretty soon I went out on my own. And after that, I guess for about 4 or 5 years, I had a boom truck and I ran 400 or 500 hives. I had a little shop in the barn downstairs here and a loading dock to hand truck equipment on and off the truck. And I started renting bees in the valley and Hood River and California and selling a little honey around town. I was a solo act. I worked alone.
Right.
And yeah, remember this is in the olden days, before flip phones, before there were robots cruising all around the OSU campus delivering fast food to kids who never need to go outside or talk to each other. Yeah, then the price of PolliNation went to $45 and there was on the horizon the possibility of making a living. So I bought a janky green stick shift forklift made out of a Datsun truck. I started building a honey house and bought a couple of used 30 frame radial extractors. I think it was in the same spring that I met Tad, which was the biggest jumping point for me. I had a teammate. So Tad was ending a life as an OSU forestry instructor and working as a paramedic. I had a half paid for farm and a flatbed boom truck and 500 beehives. And he had a beautiful 2-year-old daughter.
Nice.
So pretty soon he joined me with bees.
What a wonderful story. I mean, it's a bootstrap startup. And
that's right.
So in terms of increments and scale of your growth, Tad was the first increment there of a jump in scale. From then on, you saw a rise in your hive numbers. And was it California?
There were a couple jump points. Tad had worked for 8 years as a fireman, and he had experience with trucks and pumps and Freightliner ambulances and kind of a culture of maintenance and safety. So he brought that sensibility to kind of have a fire department level of organization and readiness in the shop and the crew and the trucks. And a nice thing is we're a good balance for each other. He brings a lot of forward momentum, and we were and are both people with a lot of ideas and competence. We love the farm we live on, and we can't believe our good fortune to be able to lead the life we lead. We became official white truck beekeepers when we picked up our second worn out flatbed for $1,000 from the OSU sale. The other jump point was getting a cell phone, the biggest modification in agricultural technology since the plow. We have incredible tools, Hummer bee forklifts with Kubota engines and tilt trailers, and cell phones with easy peasy access to aerial maps and a way of calling for help when you're stuck in a field in the middle of the night, or connecting with farmers that we need to be in communication with all the time. And in that realm, we couldn't do better. For us, chronologically, something shifted 1 year. I can't remember exactly when it was, but we were invited to bring our hives to Merced, and we met Chuck Sowers and started meeting and learning from a whole gang of Oregon, Idaho, Montana, Arkansas, and Nebraska beekeepers at a cafe next to the Turlock Travel Lodge. We discovered a whole kooky collection of the sort of smart, battle-scarred, kind, cool-headed, helpful people that we found out the sort of esprit de corps of beekeepers at that point. And we met and made friends with Jordan Dimmick out at Nampa, on the other side of the state, who is one of the best beekeepers in the country, hands down. We made connections that make it so even now, 20 years later, we have people to call, commiserate, pull each other out of the metaphone in the middle of the night, help us when we're down. And so it was at that point, coming back from our first year in Merced, that we hired our first employees, Philip and Callista. And at that point, we were running 1,500 or 2,000 hives and got a real working forklift. Then another stage I would say is in about 2008, we moved our center of operations down to the Alpine school by Monroe. And besides all the advantages of a second location, we hired Enrique, and the rest of the team is still with us now have been for the last dozen years. And those guys are amazing and dedicated, competent workers, calm and funny. I'm always learning something from them. We just have a really great workplace because of who we work with, and we run a pretty big crew. Yeah, we found at some point, after trying to do it all ourselves, we found something out about the value of human value of redundancy. Like now, if somebody gets sick or falls off a truck, we have backup. We can take a night off if we need to, and those guys can attend their parent-teacher meetings and their kids' basketball games and their kids' college graduation ceremonies. And we also have a lot more redundancy in our equipment. We've chosen our path of spending any extra money on real estate instead of trucks. So as a consequence, we have an older fleet and some very happy and luckily reliable mechanics. And yeah, we own 3 of our awesome winter yards outright. And then I guess that brings us to now with a sort of blurry fast forward of about 15 years. We're at the point now where we're approaching Social Security age, and we really don't have a solid plan, but we're working to find a way to pass on our durable and hopefully well-organized business with a high-functioning crew of employees to the next generation. The latest phase for us personally is planting our fields and pastures and winter yards and flowering cover crops and pollinator plants. As you know, as beekeepers, we need and want more flowers. When we figure out how to turn running the circus over to the next generation, I'm ready to return to older interests and grassland and wetland restoration. And Tad wants to build more things and be a forester.
So you mentioned your lovely headquarters in Alpine with the school that you headquarter out, and no one can visit that site without just being amazed and awestruck. I've been there twice, and I do not have a jealous bone in my body about anything. But when I leave there, I think, oh my God, would I love to have a place like this? It just looks like you've really made that work great for a headquarters, is buying a schoolhouse.
Yeah. It wasn't a planned project. Originally, I filled a dirt hole and had a concrete floor in the barn here that I was able to use to wire frames and build boxes and paint boxes and change the oil and so forth. And so in terms of a facility, I had pretty good luck making something out of what I had. And I was able to make my way. But then we ran out of space and spent a lot of years moving everything out of the way to do every little job, and spent a lot of time relocating things and putting them back. So we started to look for a second location where we could construct a warehouse of some kind and have some outdoor storage. But this is the Willamette Valley, and every place that we looked at was sky high expensive. Yeah. We've always gone pretty incrementally and tried to pay as we go, and we haven't gotten ahead of ourselves too far. Credit cards only went so far. But in 2007, we had some lucky misfortune. We had a giant windstorm and had a 150-year-old fir tree just smush our basically worthless house. We call it the golden tree. So we built a new house on an insurance settlement. Suddenly we had the equity that we could borrow against to buy a second property. So we were able to leverage it to buy that school in the South County. And it was kind of a white elephant for the consolidated school district. It had been empty for 10 years, except for a little community preschool that we overlapped with for a while. So the Monroe School District was happy to see us come along. They were happy to finance it for us over a number of years. And suddenly we had the space we never had before. So yeah, we had outdoor space, to winter our colonies and run our business, storage, a place to move around. And without a lot of more money, we added a wall and a couple overhead doors to the play shed that is now the center of our operation. And the guys are working down there right now. So we also got this beautiful gym to play basketball in, and for
Gorgeous.
our
It's
employees
gorgeous.
and their friends to play in. And now we've come to find out that the school has a lot of value as housing for our seasonal employees. It turns out there's a lot of potential in developing all those classrooms and bathrooms. So we're taking it in that direction right now.
And a cafeteria.
And the cafeteria. Exactly. Yeah.
It's kind of the McMenamins model, but for beekeeping.
It is. It is. It is. I would like to have their cash flow to put a brand new roof on it and do a little bit more remodeling. But it's been great. It's been great. The ball field is going to soon be planted with flowers, and it's worked out. It's mostly cost us gravel and hardscaping a little bit of the area around the building. It doesn't have forklift access, for example. It's a 1960s single-story building. So we've made it work pretty well. We've got a wood shop in it, and a cafeteria, housing, honey bottling, and candle making room, and a place to scrape frames. So we're doing all right.
Very impressive. That's all I can say. So kind of taking a step back here in terms of honeybees and honeybee health in the time you've been working with bees, what is kind of your overall thoughts of the changes you've seen with all that we deal with as beekeepers?
Well, beekeeping is never boring. We've had to operate in an environment of Varroa mite problems and EFB for our entire beekeeping career. That's more than 20 years for me, and we're sick of it.
Yeah.
Tad's had bees since he was 14, and he and his brother inherited his grandpa's beehives, and they were in the backyard growing up. They were always alive, always made honey, and if they died, a swarm moved in before they knew about it. Yeah. Today, it is more hard, but we are soldiering on. There are so many confounding variables and sublethal effects that it feels like a crapshoot sometimes. But what really comes to mind for me is the loss of habitat. A lot of us, there are a lot of beekeepers here in Western Oregon, kind of on top of each other. And we do make most of our living as pollinators. And like a lot of places, the Willamette Valley is transforming over time. We have high efficacy herbicides and clean cultivation in the hazelnuts and Christmas trees and super exuberant roadside mowing. And on what used to be the edges, we have a simplified landscape, tidier, better kept rural places, less brush, more mowing, fewer blackberries to make our honey on. There's just not enough pollen to go around, and maybe there never was, especially in the late summer. And there are the old industrial sites and mill sites that used to be perfectly good bee yards are now replaced by blocks of storage units and housing developments. And will evolution or breeding or the promises of tech give us healthy bees in our lifetime? I have no clue. But I don't feel super hopeful. I do feel hopeful, for example, about Project Apis M. That team gives me a lot of hope. All beekeepers of any scale need to pitch into that organization. They coordinate sensible, solid beekeeping research in this country. The Seeds for Bees program in the almonds has been notable and fabulous. We can really tell the difference. And we need to pursue that kind of thing in Oregon agriculture as well. So we're hopeful. We're hopeful about the advancing technologies in mite control and viral control. but we aren't holding our breath.
So you brought up earlier being down at a truck stop by Merced and running into Chuck Sowers and other people. Your comments always bring the same thing to mind on the subject. Is that it seems to me that in the time we've been keeping bees, that 99% of our solutions came from other beekeepers. We have solved our own, for good or bad, for better or worse, the best solutions have come with beekeepers solving the problems for themselves. How do you feel about that?
I would absolutely agree, although I think that on a landscape scale, that public policy needs to be oriented towards protecting farmland,
Yeah.
Promoting a environmentally and economically sustainable farming future. I think that farmers are really good at what they do, and they're excellent at solving their own problems. But there's also a situation of carrying capacity and land use planning that's bigger than we are. Farmers, including bee farmers, are optimistic. I'm grateful and glad for the opportunity to never be done with this project and to continually adjust and reform and improve. But I don't think that farmers can continue to operate without a different kind of public policy that is focused a little bit more on land use.
I think in Oregon, we're really blessed to have, I think we almost have a model. It's not perfect, but for land use planning compared to many other states. And I've been involved with that on many times.
You bet.
Yeah, so I am totally feeling the same chord on that you are.
You bet. Yeah.
But I suppose the issue is we are holding on to maybe farmland more effectively than Idaho, for example. But there is the trend that Karen observed of weed management being, ratcheted up. There seems like a solution like Project Apis M developed in almonds, even though it's small, it has momentum and is growing. We don't have something comparable in Oregon that's just you can see the future of where it will go, and what's that piece look like?
I think that it requires a lot of vision, and it's a little bit hard when we're all staring at our screens to not go out and look around and talk to the other people who are taking care of the land at the county level or the state level. I mean, we do have a really high functioning beekeeping community in Oregon. It takes, I found out when I was working with the state bee association that I would not have been aware of the huge effort that's involved at the state level, not only in research and advocacy, but at the state legislature. So yeah, we commercial beekeepers benefit enormously from the public, and farmers in general benefit enormously from the public. That effort of people around the state, people in Salem and at the university. Right now, we are still living in a time of cheap oil, cheap oil and high demand for corn energy. That's why the Midwest is all corn and soybeans. I'd love to see that change and see more of the Willamette Valley seed industry producing clover and other soil improving cover crops benefit from that. 50, 60 years ago, nitrogen fixing cover crops were part of agriculture, and they aren't right now. And I think they will return. Vetch used to be planted for fertility reasons in the valley. Tad did his master's on nitrogen fixing cover crops, and he recorded 300 pounds per acre of nitrogen from vetch cover crops. But in today's farming system, it just doesn't pay. So there aren't enough flowers in farming. And I don't think it's really about what crops being grown, but more about what the rest of the people besides the farmers are doing in the valley. All of the edge, all of the roadsides, all of the rural residential properties that are out there. I mean, we have a pretty public sensibility around the taking care of a sort of fire-wise land use, trying to keep the fire vegetation down, burnable vegetation down around your house. And that's pretty well sunk in to, I think, most of Western Oregon, at least. And I think that we could have the same thing where we have, some kind of a push to messier native vegetation and less mowing and more flowers. I think that it's not really on the backs of the farming community. I think it's on the backs of everybody else.
Yeah, there's a lot of non-crop areas that are just sprayed out and just mowed.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, there's kind of sometimes a conflict. Across the street from me, I have a great neighbor, 125 acres of hazelnuts. Well, below the hazelnuts is a carpet of dandelions. Wonderful. But when he goes to spray, because he's a good neighbor, he mows the dandelions out first. Well, that's good for the pesticide application to the bees, but bad for the nutrition. And we struggle those types of things as well. There's almost like no answer sometimes.
There's no bad guy. Our bees are bringing in hazelnut pollen all week long.
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember when I first moved to this valley, everybody's complaining about grass seed and how you couldn't eat it and how we should have food crops in the Willamette Valley. I don't think as a beekeeper, I want to meddle into the who should farm what and what should and shouldn't be farmed. I think that's a dangerous territory to go to when we have thousands of stinging insects across the street.
But I did like what you said earlier, that there is a way in which we are a really strong seed growing state.
Yeah.
And that in some ways, this industry has a lot of potential that could be met if more leguminous crops were in demand in the Midwest. That really is a way forward that's a vision forward for how.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm always happy to see the use and slowly growing awareness of cover crops of any kind. I know my friend Rebecca Sweet at Buzz Cover Crops. She's supplying cover crop seeds to all kinds of wineries now, and that's just a change of use that comes out of an industry that can afford a little bit of experimentation, but it also does have a fertility result for them as well. So I think there's all kinds of little hopeful things out there. Takes the people to be able to form some kind of a message and take it forward.
So you were secretary for the Oregon State Beekeepers Association, did just an awesome job and very appreciated for that. Makes me want to ask you, on these issues, and the Oregon State Beekeepers does work heavily with the legislature when necessary, but do you suppose maybe our state organization should maybe involve themselves more with this as far as the land use? That kind of comes down sometimes as political. I know that when, Measure 3749 came through, which was, breaking up rural properties, it became a political issue. So that's kind of tough when you're bringing it into the Oregon State Beekeepers purview, but it seems like there might be a part the OSBA could play on some of these issues of forage for bees in the areas that you've highlighted.
Yeah, sure. The OSBA and the Farm Bureau and 1,000 Friends for Oregon. There's a potential for a pretty big coalition of people to try to communicate a message that maybe part of that sales pitch is that we're going to build a market for cover crop seeds, or at least thank the market that's there and point it out to highlight what is happening. I think probably more likely than trying to push public policy.
Well, Karen, in hearing about your beginnings and your background and Tad's background, and now kind of thinking about, Social Security and all of that, sounds like you've kind of come full circle. And I think the ideas that you have here are something we need to jump on and spend more time on here in Oregon. And we can do that. We can do it.
Yeah, we can do it.
Well, just maybe to round things out, I'm a buyer of your honey. I go to the First Alternative Co-op in Corvallis. I pick up your honey, and I think it's delicious. And I think, one thing that we have talked, we had an episode previous to this with a honey producer whose name is also Karen from Saskatchewan, in an area that's not, honey is the most important thing. It is the only thing that they, key thing that they produce. Tell us a little bit about how honey production and the customers and the other hive products sort of fit into the whole business, and maybe also how it helps make a connection to Oregonians more broadly.
Honey is a minor part of our income stream, but I love honey. It's a magic potion. It's like the distilled essence of all the people and farmers and farming and flowery habitat all around us. Bees do cross political boundaries and legal boundaries at will. And so there is something unifying about bees and beekeeping that does give us a different perspective than other farmers have. We rely on the goodwill and the good practices of rural people, farmers, crazy hippies in the hills, foresters, downtown backyard gardeners. All of those things are connected by bees. So it kind of gives, I guess I feel really lucky because I've been able to have this sort of black and white understanding of my world come into color and become into greater focus and detail over the years in the same place by having honeybees. I've met people, I've met farmers, it's been a great way to step into somebody else's backyard because of both need and interest to find out about what's going on in the county and on land.
Oh, I can just imagine a bee yard is a great way to get to know what's going on in an area. Maybe a final question. What's the craziest honey flow you ever experienced in all these years? The one that was sort of odd, strange, unexpected. It's coming out of the extractor. What is this? Or anything like that.
The craziest honey flow. Yeah, we put rims on our bees at the end of the season and in order to feed pollen fast and easy. And there have been Septembers and Octobers where the bees have just filled that up with honey.
Really?
Late in the season. And that has always surprised me. The most delicious honey, I think, that I've tasted does come out of Coast Range. And that does change year to year by what the weather's like, when what's blooming, when we have the madrone or the maple or the cascara coming out. Depends on the weather. Bees fly on it. It really changes the taste.
Well, Karen, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with us today, and good luck. I know you've got a lot of work. You've got the whole season ahead of you, so we wish you all the best in this beekeeping season.
Thanks a bunch. And thanks a bunch for all the work that you guys have done. Makes a big difference.
Thank you for all you do, Karen. You're really appreciated from everybody around here.
Thank you so much for listening. Show notes with links from each episode are available at the website pollinationpodcast.oregonstate.edu. I also love hearing from you, and there's a form at the website where you can pop in and say hello and give me feedback. If you want to support the show, remember to leave a rating on iTunes, Spotify, or whatever podcast mothership you use. And finally, if you have the means and you want to help support my lab's effort to document bee biodiversity in Oregon, visit OregonBeeAtlas.org and follow down to the donate button where you can make a tax-deductible donation to the Jerry and Judith Paul Native Pollinator Endowment. Every little bit helps. See you next episode.